I want you to picture this. The director of the FBI is suing a magazine for hurt feelings, while a guy with a gun gets close enough to a president that the Secret Service has to hit the eject button on the entire White House Correspondents Dinner. At the same time, tankers are stacked up around the Strait of Hormuz, the global economy is holding its breath, and the official message from Washington is basically, everything's under control, please enjoy the vibes. And in the middle of all of that, the President of the United States decides this is the perfect moment to demand the release of UFO files, offering Americans the Cosmic Consolation Prize. Sure, your fuel costs are going up and the Middle East might choke off global shipping, but hey, maybe aliens are real. It's like watching a building on fire and the landlord just hands out coupons for the gift shop. What ties all this together is not just incompetence or bad luck. It's something much weirder. A national security state that's ferociously protective of its image, strangely casual about physical reality, and increasingly dependent on distraction when the real-world consequences of its decisions start to pile up. We're told to obsess over leaks, lawsuits, and extraterrestrials, while the basic question, can you actually keep the people safe and tell the truth at the same time, never seems to get a straight answer. Tonight I'm walking you through what I'm calling the National Security Circus. The FBI director's $250 million temper tantrum, the White House Correspondents Dinner that turned into a live fire stress test, pun intended, a slow-motion economic chokehold in the Strait of Hormuz, and a president who wants to open the X-Files while the Epstein files and the JFK files are still half-sealed and strategically timed. Welcome to the week we're told there's nothing to see here as long as we're looking in exactly the wrong direction. Before you ask, no, the color's not off, my face is red, it's Florida, and I'm hot. Now let's start this circus off right. The FBI director versus the press. Kash Patel, the sitting director of the FBI, has filed a $250 million defamation lawsuit against The Atlantic over a story that said he's been drinking excessively and going missing from work. According to the piece, colleagues were alarmed by his behavior, episodes of heavy drinking, unexplained absences, and questions about whether he was really at the helm of one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies on Earth. That's not a small allegation. That's the kind of thing that raises questions about who's actually running the show. Patel's response? Not a detailed public accounting, not a transparent timeline of his schedule, not records of his official movements. Instead, a lawsuit calling the article a sweeping malicious hit piece and demanding $250 million in damages. His legal team insists he's at the FBI headquarters nearly every single day, that he drinks responsibly if at all, and that any suggestion otherwise is not just wrong, but defamatory. If you take them at their word, this is all just a massive smear by a liberal magazine with an axe to grind. Now, that narrative might be more convincing if the broader context didn't look like an institution fighting harder to manage perception than to answer uncomfortable questions. Justice Department and White House officials have rushed to call the reporting false while The Atlantic has stood by its story, saying it's confident in its sources. This is the same government that has spent years telling us to trust its independent institutions, while those institutions increasingly respond to scrutiny with legal threats and PR statements instead of documents and data. This isn't just about whether Patel likes a drink. It's about what happens when national security leadership is treated like a brand to be defended instead of a public office to be examined. When the FBI director sues a news outlet for reporting his conduct, it sends a very clear message to future whistleblowers and investigative reporters. If you poke too hard at the image, you might get dragged into court. And remember, this is the same FBI where agents were reportedly used like a personal SWAT escort for Patel's girlfriend, assigned to chauffeur her and guard her, followed by a jaw-dropping episode where agents searched a reporter's name in a database and floated a stalking case after she exposed it. The Bureau only backed off when the Justice Department officials effectively said, no, you can't weaponize criminal statutes against someone for writing about you. So, yes, you could say the response time about accountability might have been a little faster if fewer resources were tied up playing bodyguard and intimidation squad. Now, let's flip to the second act, security theater in the most literal sense. At the annual White House Correspondents Dinner in Washington, D.C., shots were fired near the security screening area at the Washington Hilton, leading to the evacuation of President Donald Trump and the First Lady and other top officials. This is supposed to be one of the most controlled lockdown events in the Capitol. Journalists, senior officials, and the president all in one place. It's a dream target for anyone who wants to test or break the system. According to the reports, a suspect with a firearm reached the vicinity of the main metal detector area, fired at Secret Service personnel and caused enough chaos that the agents shouted, "Shots fired!" inside the ballroom. The president and his entourage were hustled into a secure area while hundreds of guests were left to process the fact that the line between elite political pageant and active security incident had just disappeared in real time. If this feels familiar, that's because it is. Less than 2 years ago, in Butler, Pennsylvania, the Secret Service had obtained classified intel about a threat to Trump's life 10 days before an assassination attempt, but failed to share it with the agents and local partners responsible for securing the rally. A GAO report ordered by Senator Grassley laid out a laundry list of failures, misallocated resources, poor training, communication breakdown, and the damning conclusion that better sharing of intel would have changed the security posture at the event. So when someone can take a cross-country trip, show up at another high-profile event, and still get close enough to force an evacuation at the Hilton, the joke writes itself. The shooter took the long way around the country, and still the system couldn't stay ahead of him. The response inside the ballroom might have been quicker if the people running this apparatus spent less energy on PR and more on not needing to shout "Shots fired!" in front of an entire political press corps. And you can't help but hear the snark in the background. Maybe Patel would have caught the threat earlier if he hadn't been locked out of his own computer, or passed out in his office where breaching tools were needed for his office door. And his reputation. Early coverage leaned hard on how swiftly the president was removed, how heroically the Secret Service responded, and how under control the situation was. As if the real story was the efficiency of the damage control, not the fact that the damage was needed at all. It's basically the public safety version of "the operation was a success, please ignore the part where the patient almost died." Now zoom out one more level. While this is happening domestically, the US is deeply entangled in an escalating standoff in the Strait of Hormuz. The United States has moved to effectively blockade Iranian ports, and Iran has responded by choking off traffic through the strait. One of the most important choke points for global oil and shipping. What you end up with is a floating parking lot of ships, each one carrying cargo tied to real people's jobs, fuel prices, and basic economic stability. The tankers registered to countries that barely have a river, let alone a coastline. States like Malawi are stuck trying to navigate a game of chicken between the US Navy and Iranian forces. The UK and France, they're present enough to be noticed, but not enough to actually own the consequences. Lurking at the edge of action, trying to look engaged without becoming deeply responsible for the outcome. It's the international relations version of that coworker who walks in right after the crisis has been handled and says, "Yeah, we really nailed that one, didn't we?" An FBI director trying to litigate his reputation back into shape, a Secret Service apparatus that just got exposed as vulnerable in front of the entire political media class, again, and a global trade artery being squeezed by a standoff that everyone pretends is manageable, while cash registers and pumps tell a different story. And into this already crowded disaster board walks our final act. UFOs, JFK, Epstein, and the president's favorite move, promising to open the files just when the walls start closing in. Now we get to the part of the show where the circus really earns its name. Let's talk about distractions as a governing strategy. President Trump has publicly ordered federal agencies to begin releasing files related to UFOs, or in modern bureaucratic language, unidentified anomalous phenomena, or according to Vice President Vance, demons. Roll a clip.
I don't think they're aliens. I think they're demons anyway, but that's a longer discussion.
On its face, this sounds like a win for transparency. For decades, people have been asking what the government knows about strange objects in the sky, mysterious encounters, and the possibility of extraterrestrial life. When a president says, "We're going to open the vault," you can almost hear the X-Files theme song queuing up in the background. But timing, as always in politics, is everything. Critics have already described this UFO push as the ultimate weapon of mass distraction, from the mounting scrutiny over Jeffrey Epstein's network, flight logs, and the people who orbited his world. Representative Thomas Massey flat out argued that all this sudden enthusiasm for aliens seems a little too convenient when the public is still asking who knew what, who went where, and why so many powerful men seem allergic to accountability. And this isn't Trump's first rodeo when it comes to dangling classified files as a shiny object. Back in 2017, he hyped the long-blocked and classified JFK files, and presented himself as the man who would finally let the public see everything. What actually happened? Thousands of records were released, but hundreds were still withheld or heavily redacted after the CIA and FBI lobbied for more time, and Trump signed off on the delay, citing national security. In other words, full transparency, but not today. In 2025, he did it again, another major release of JFK documents through the National Archives, with headlines about long-hidden records finally coming out, even as historians pointed out that the really sensitive material still seemed to be either missing, heavily redacted, or less earth-shattering than advertised. Internet sleuths summed it up as just another nothing burger, and questioned whether the main function of the release was to change the subject. On Epstein, the same pattern shows up. During and after the 2024 campaign, Trump leaned hard into the idea that he'd be fine with releasing Epstein's documents, encouraging Republicans to support bills forcing more disclosure and saying, "We have nothing to hide." At one point, former Florida Attorney General and now former Attorney General Pam Bondi was tasked with reviewing Epstein files, and the message from the White House was that credible records would be released. But by 2025, Trump's own Justice Department was saying a client list didn't exist as a discrete document, even as reporting suggested his name had appeared among others in internal briefings. The promise of a big reveal quietly dissolved into bureaucratic language and institutional amnesia. So when you see that same president now pushing UFO releases after half measures on JFK and half answers on Epstein, you're not crazy for seeing a pattern. It's the same trick over and over. Tease a massive historical disclosure, time it to overlap with embarrassing or dangerous developments elsewhere, deliver something but not everything, and then wrap any gaps in the language of national security or legal constraints. Meanwhile, the practical message is stop asking about the stuff that implicates living powerful people. Look up at the stars instead. The playbook is old, but it works. Step 1 highlights something mysterious, enormous, and unsolved, like UFOs. Step 2, frame yourself as the brave truth teller breaking with stodgy tradition. Step 3, bask in the frenzy as headlines and social media obsess over what might be hiding in the skies, instead of what's been hiding in sealed court filings and redacted documents on Earth. And while all that's happening, the probing isn't being done by aliens. It's happening at the pump, at the grocery store, and in your monthly bills as the Strait of Hormuz standoff drives costs up, shipping routes twist around blockades, and a manageable crisis quietly turns into a surcharge on everyday life. The administration wants you so focused on whether we're alone in the universe that you don't notice how alone you are at the checkout. Now let's thread these 4 stories together and look at what they reveal about the modern American security state. First, the Kash Patel lawsuit. When a top national security official responds to unflattering reporting with a massive lawsuit, it doesn't just dispute the facts, it weaponizes power against scrutiny. The Atlantic says it stands by its reporting. Patel says the story is not just wrong but malicious. That conflict should invite deeper inquiry, release travel logs, meeting calendars, visitor logs, and internal memos. Let the public see who's telling the truth. But instead of using the evidence, the fight is being channeled into a courtroom where discovery will almost certainly be selective, delayed, and fought tooth and nail on national security grounds. Second, the White House Correspondents Dinner shooting. This incident is a stress test of everything we've been promised about physical protection at the highest levels. If a gunman can reach the security perimeter at one of the most scrutinized events of the year, force an evacuation of the president, and create chaos inside the venue, what does that say about less public, less rehearsed environments? It raises the question nobody in power likes to answer. How much of national security planning is real capability, and how much is stagecraft designed to make everyone feel safer than they actually are? And in the background, that Butler, Pennsylvania report is still sitting there quietly, reminding us that this isn't a one-off. Third, the Strait of Hormuz standoff. The blockade dynamic there is a perfect snapshot of 21st century geopolitics as performance. The U.S. Navy sails in to ensure freedom of navigation, Iran responds by threatening to close the strait. Allies show up to wave flags in support, and meanwhile, insurers raise premiums. Shipping companies reroute or delay, and ordinary people pay more for fuel if they can get it. Each side has to keep staring the other down to avoid losing face, even as the economic pressure quietly builds on everyone else. Fourth, the UFO gambit and its cousins, JFK and Epstein. By turning the cosmic unknown, Cold War mysteries, and a billionaire predators network into a rotating set of "we'll release the file" teases, the administration isn't responding to public interest. It's hijacking that interest and redirecting it away from messy, human-scale scandals. You don't have to believe in aliens to see how useful they are as a narrative device. Aliens are vague. Secret Service failures in Pennsylvania and DC are not. Epstein circles are not. Patel's conduct is not. So where does that leave us? We're living in a system where national security has become a flexible shield. It protects leaders from embarrassment, institutions from accountability, and failures from being dissected in public. When the story threatens the image, it becomes a defamation issue. When the plan fails, the focus shifts to how quickly the response team reacted. When geopolitical brinkmanship makes life more expensive and fragile for everyone else, it's repackaged as resolve and strength. And when uncomfortable questions about powerful people's association and behavior won't go away, the conversation drifts upwards into the stars. Once you see the pattern, it's kind of hard to unsee it. So what do we do with all this? I'm not going to pretend that there's a nice, neat, satisfying ending here, because there isn't. But there are a few things worth sitting with. First, the Kash Patel lawsuit should not just be treated as gossipy intrigue about one powerful man's reputation. It's a test case for how far senior national security officials are willing to go to push back against investigative reporting. If this becomes normal, if every hard-hitting piece about intelligence or law enforcement leadership is met with a 9-figure defamation suit and a quiet search of a reporter's name in FBI systems, we're going to see fewer people willing to write those stories, fewer sources willing to talk, and more truth buried under legal cost and fear. When national security becomes synonymous with "don't write that," the public loses. Second, the White House Correspondents Dinner incident should puncture the illusion that spectacle equals safety. The Secret Service did some things right that night. They prevented an assassination. They got the president out. They neutralized a threat. But the fact that the threat got that far at all on the heels of a scathing GAO report about Butler, Pennsylvania, deserves more than a brief investigation and a few tweaks to the perimeter. It deserves a full accounting of planning failures, red teams, and what corners were cut in the name of convenience or optics. If we aren't willing to demand that level of introspection when the president is nearly within range, what chance do we have when it comes to everyday people in less protected spaces? Third, the Strait of Hormuz situation is a reminder that security isn't just soldiers, agents, and trade routes, fuel lines, and the price of basic goods. When governments frame a blockade as a show of strength without honestly grappling with the downstream effects on ordinary lives, they're doing the same things we've seen every other part of this episode. Choosing theatrics over candor. Global shipping doesn't care about talking points. It cares about risk, insurance, and whether people get what they need on time. And finally, the trilogy of JFK, Epstein, and UFO disclosures forces us to ask what kind of transparency we actually want. If you're excited about the possibility of getting real answers on unexplained phenomena or Cold War history, you're not wrong to feel that way. But we should be equally, if not more, insistent on transparency about things that already happened here on Earth and still shape who has power today. Who was warned before Butler and did nothing? Who staffed the security perimeter at the Hilton? Who moved in Epstein's orbit? And who approved using FBI muscle as a private escort service? If we accept a trade where we get more visibility into hypothetical aliens but not into the very real human predators, failures, and abuses, that's not a win. That's a diversion. The more dramatic the spectacle, the more calmly we should be asking basic questions. Who's actually in charge? What are the trade-offs you're not admitting? What evidence are you refusing to show? And why exactly do you think we're better off believing the performance instead of seeing the backstage? Because in the end, security isn't just about keeping bad things from happening. It's about trusting the people who say they're protecting you. And trust doesn't come from lawsuits, staged confidence, or late-night alien reveals. It doesn't come from half-released JFK files and vanishing Epstein promises. It comes from documents, from records, from accountability, and from institutions that don't panic when someone turns the lights on. Until that's the norm, we're not living in a fortress. We're sitting under a tent, watching the show, hoping the lions remember which side of the cage they're supposed to stay on, while the ringmaster waves another classified folder in the air and tells us once again that this time, for real, he's going to tell us everything. Until next time, I'm Kyle Fields. Take care.